The wind arrives first. It comes sighing out of the darkness beyond the wall, crossing leagues of frozen wilderness before striking the ancient ice with a low, mournful sound. A lone ranger stands upon the crest of that colossal barrier, his black cloak snapping softly behind him. Below, torchlight flickers in the yard of Castle Black. Above, countless stars burn in a sky so clear and cold that it feels carved from crystal. The ice beneath his boots rises nearly 700 feet into the air, stretching east and west farther than the eye can follow, and as he gazes north into the endless night, one question settles over him like falling snow. Who truly built this thing, and why? As you settle into this journey through the full history of the wall, let your thoughts drift slowly with the northern wind. This is a tale of ancient kings, forgotten wars, vanished peoples, and mysteries so old that even the maesters of the citadel can offer only fragments of answers. If you have traveled these roads before, quietly note which night of the journey this is for you. If you are joining for the first time, simply call it Night 1. The story begins long before Aegon's conquest, long before House Targaryen crossed the narrow sea, and so far in the distant past that history fades into legend and legend into myth. Why did the wall need to exist at all? The question seems simple until you examine the oldest surviving traditions of Westeros. According to the histories preserved in the world of ice and fire, the wall was raised after the Long Night, a terrible age when darkness covered the world and the others first emerged from the lands of always winter. The Long Night stands at the center of nearly every northern legend. Old Nan tells Bran Stark that winter lasted for a generation. In Yi Tai, on the far side of the known world, ancient records speak of a similar catastrophe. Even distant cultures separated by oceans remember a time when darkness swallowed the sun. The consistency of these traditions suggests that behind the myths lies a genuine disaster that scarred the memory of mankind. Before the wall existed, Westeros was a very different place. The first men had crossed the arm of Dorne thousands of years earlier, bringing bronze weapons, horses, and the gods they worshipped beneath open skies. Their arrival sparked a long conflict with the Children of the Forest, the mysterious race that inhabited Westeros before human settlement. The children fought with dragon glass weapons and strange forms of magic tied to weirwood trees. The war continued for generations until both sides finally gathered upon the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye and forged the pact. There, beneath carved weirwoods watched by the Green Men, peace was established between human and child. For thousands of years afterward, the first men spread across the continent. Great kingdoms emerged in the north, the Riverlands, and the Vale. House Stark rose among the northern kings. House Durrandon ruled the Stormlands. The ancestors of House Royce became powerful in the Vale. Yet despite the growth of civilization, stories persisted of dangers lurking beyond the northern wilderness. The lands that later became known as the Haunted Forest and the Frost Fangs remained vast, untamed, and only lightly explored. Even in later centuries, many rangers of the Night's Watch vanished there without explanation. The far north always carried the feeling of a place where older powers still lingered. Then came the Long Night. The exact date is unknown. The maesters cannot assign a year because no written records survive from that era. What remains are songs, legends, and fragments of oral history carried across thousands of years. The darkness descended. Crops failed. Temperatures fell. Fear spread across the world. In the northern tales, pale beings known as the Others emerged from the lands beyond civilization. They rode through the darkness and raised the dead to serve them. Every version of the story differs in details, yet all agree on the central truth. Humanity faced an enemy unlike any it had ever known. One figure appears repeatedly in accounts of that struggle. He is remembered as the last hero. According to Old Nan's tale in A Game of Thrones, the last hero set out during the long night seeking the children of the forest. His companions died one by one. His horse perished. His sword froze and broke in the cold. At last, he found the children, and together, they helped turn the tide against the others. Martin deliberately leaves much of this story mysterious, but its importance cannot be overstated. The legend establishes an alliance between mankind and the children at the very moment when survival itself hung in the balance. Why does that alliance matter so much? Because when the long night finally ended, the wall appeared soon afterward. The traditional explanation seems straightforward. Humanity defeated the Others during the battle for the dawn. The threat was driven back into the far north. Then a massive defensive barrier was raised to ensure such a catastrophe could never happen again. Yet the deeper one looks, the stranger the story becomes. The wall is not merely large, it is impossibly large. Nearly 300 miles long, composed primarily of ice, towering roughly 700 feet high in its prime. It remains one of the greatest engineering achievements in the history of the known world. Even the Valyrians, with dragons and advanced knowledge, never constructed anything remotely comparable. Standing before it, many visitors react with disbelief. Tyrion Lannister experiences exactly that reaction during his visit to Castle Black. He has read about the wall his entire life. He knows its dimensions. Yet seeing it with his own eyes leaves him stunned. Numbers fail to capture reality. The wall is less like a fortification and more like a mountain placed deliberately across an entire continent. Its sheer scale raises uncomfortable questions. How many workers would have been required? How long would construction have taken? What resources could possibly support such a project in the aftermath of a civilization threatening war? The mysteries grow even deeper when magic enters the discussion. Maester Aemon speaks openly about ancient spells woven into the wall. Cold hands cannot pass through the black gate beneath the night fort. The Others never simply walk through the wall, despite thousands of years passing since its construction. Certain magical protections clearly exist. In the novels, these protections are treated not as rumors, but as accepted realities. The wall is ice, certainly, but it is also something more. It functions as a boundary between worlds, a line dividing the realms of men from whatever waits beyond. This detail changes everything. If magic was essential to the wall's purpose, ordinary builders could not have created it alone. The children of the forest immediately become significant again. Their abilities with weirwoods, green seeing, and ancient enchantments are established repeatedly throughout the books. The legends claiming that the children helped build the wall suddenly seem less fanciful. Giants enter the picture as well. Northern traditions insist that giants assisted in its construction. The stories describe enormous beings, moving materials and shaping foundations that ordinary men could never manage. Modern maesters often dismiss such claims as folklore, yet giants undeniably existed. Jon Snow meets them. The free folk live alongside them. Once you accept that giants were real, the old stories become harder to ignore. Who then was actually responsible? The answer traditionally begins with one name: Brandon the Builder. His shadow stretches across the entirety of Northern history. House Stark traces its lineage back to him. He is credited with founding Winterfell. He is credited with raising the wall. Some legends even attribute the construction of Storm's End to his genius. The problem is that these accomplishments are so enormous, so geographically scattered, and so separated by wildly different traditions that many readers have long wondered whether Brandon the Builder was truly a single man by the time his name enters recorded memory. Thousands of years have already passed. History has become inseparable from myth. Yet one fact remains certain: whether Brandon was one ruler, several rulers, remembered as one, or a legendary figure built from fragments of real people, his name became forever tied to the wall. Every generation of Starks inherited that legacy. Every ranger who climbed the icy steps of Castle Black lived beneath it. Every Lord Commander who gazed north into the darkness remembered the same ancient claim. Somewhere in the distant aftermath of the Long Night, someone conceived of a barrier so vast that 8,000 years later, men would still stand in awe beneath its frozen face. And far beyond the wall, where the stars shone over the silent forests and the endless snowfields of the true north, the reason for its construction waited patiently in the darkness. Why would the survivors of the Long Night create a permanent military order if their greatest enemy had already been defeated? The question hangs over the earliest history of the Night's Watch, like frost upon black stone. According to Northern tradition, the Watch was founded in the aftermath of the Battle for the Dawn, when the others had been driven back into the distant north. The victory was supposed to have ended the Great Crisis. The darkness receded. The seasons returned to their natural cycle. Human kingdoms began rebuilding. Yet rather than celebrating peace and moving on, the peoples of Westeros committed themselves to maintaining a vast frontier defense that would endure for thousands of years. Such a decision suggests that those who lived through the Long Night believed the danger was not truly gone. The Night's Watch was unlike any institution that would emerge later in Westerosi history. It predated the Seven Kingdoms. It predated the arrival of the Andals. It even predated the establishment of many noble houses that later became powerful. Men from every region could join its ranks. Brothers swore lifelong vows. They surrendered inheritance rights, political loyalties, and family claims. The oath itself reveals the ancient purpose of the order. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. These words were not composed for fighting wildlings. They sound like the memory of a far older war. In its earliest centuries, the Watch possessed resources that would astonish later generations. 19 castles stretched along the wall. From the Shadow Tower in the west to East Watch by the sea on the shores of the Shivering Sea, the Night Fort became the greatest among them. Massive kitchens, huge stables, extensive storage chambers, and towering halls reflected an institution that once commanded immense manpower. By the time Tyrion Lannister visits the Wall in 298 AC, most of those castles stand abandoned and empty, yet their ruins hint at a forgotten age when the Watch maintained a strength measured not in hundreds but likely in thousands. Why was the Night Fort built on such a monumental scale? The answer becomes stranger the more closely one studies its legends. The Night Fort is the oldest castle on the Wall and served as the headquarters of the Night's Watch for centuries. Its enormous curtain walls, gigantic halls, and deep wells suggest construction for a population far larger than anything seen in the modern Watch. Bran Stark, Meera Reed, Jojen Reed, and Hodor passed through its ruins during their journey north. What they discover is not merely an abandoned fortress, but a place saturated with memory. Every stone seems to preserve echoes of forgotten centuries. The most remarkable feature hidden within the Night Fort is the Black Gate. Deep beneath the castle lies a living weirwood door, pale as bone, with a face carved into its surface. When Samwell Tarly speaks the vows of the Night's Watch, the door opens. The gate is not mechanical, it is magical. It responds to sacred words spoken by sworn brothers. No ordinary engineer could have created such a thing. Its existence strongly suggests direct involvement by the Children of the Forest or another source of ancient magic connected to the wall's construction. The Black Gate also reveals something important about the original design of the wall. The barrier was never intended to be completely sealed. Trusted guardians required ways to pass through it. Certain doors existed because the Watch needed access to lands beyond the wall. Rangers were expected to travel north. Scouts were expected to gather information. This raises another fascinating possibility. Perhaps the builders never intended permanent separation from the north. Perhaps they intended controlled contact with whatever remained beyond the wall. The Night Fort accumulated darker stories as centuries passed. One of the most famous concerns, the Rat Cook. According to Bran Stark's recollection, the Rat Cook was a Night Fort cook who murdered a king's son, baked him into a pie, and served him to his unsuspecting father. The gods punished the crime by transforming the cook into a gigantic white rat, doomed to feed upon his own offspring forever. The tale resembles other grim legends throughout Westeros, yet Martin places it specifically at the Night Fort. The choice is unlikely to be accidental. Again and again, the oldest castle on the wall becomes the setting for stories about broken vows, cursed acts, and supernatural consequences. Another legend tells of Maddax, a murderous spirit said to wander the castle's halls carrying a blood-stained weapon. There are stories of 100-foot-deep well haunted by unseen voices. Tales speak of ghostly children and vanished brothers. Most of these stories are folklore rather than history, yet their concentration around the Night Fort remains striking. No other castle in Westeros possesses such a collection of eerie traditions. It is as though generations of men sensed that the place stood closer to ancient mysteries than anywhere else south of the Wall. Why do so many supernatural legends gather around one fortress? One answer lies in simple age. The Night Fort existed longer than any other castle along the Wall. Thousands of years passed through its gates. Thousands of brothers lived and died within its halls. Human memory naturally accumulates stories around ancient places. Yet another possibility exists. The night fort may occupy a location where the magical forces woven into the wall are particularly strong. The presence of the Black Gate suggests that powerful enchantments were concentrated there from the beginning. No story associated with the Night Fort is more important than that of the Night's King. The legend survives, primarily through northern tradition. According to Old Nan's account, the Night's King served as the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. During his tenure, he encountered a woman with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. He loved her, brought her back to the Night Fort, and declared himself king. Together they ruled from the wall for 13 years. The tale claims that sacrifices were offered and strange practices took place within the castle. Fear spread across the north as the Lord Commander transformed into something other than a guardian. The details become even more fascinating when examined carefully. The woman described in the story resembles the others more than any known human population. Her pale skin and blue eyes strongly echo the characteristics associated with those ancient enemies. The legend never explicitly calls her an other. It simply presents the description and leaves listeners to draw conclusions. Martin often writes this way, allowing unsettling implications to emerge naturally rather than stating them directly. The result is a mystery that has survived for thousands of years. Eventually, the Night's King's reign came to an end. According to the legend, Brandon the Breaker, king in the north, and a Stark of Winterfell, joined forces with Joramun, the king beyond the wall, to overthrow him. Together they defeated the Night's King and destroyed his power. Afterward, all records of his true name were erased. Only the title remained. The punishment was deliberate. The memory of the man himself was deemed too dangerous to preserve. That alliance between Brandon the Breaker and Joramun deserves careful attention. Throughout most of history, the kings beyond the wall and the rulers of Winterfell existed as rivals separated by the wall itself. Yet in this story, they cooperate. They recognize a common threat greater than their differences. Such cooperation suggests that whatever happened at the Night Fort frightened both sides of the wall equally. The danger was not merely political, it touched something deeper, something connected to the purpose for which the wall had originally been raised. And so the old castle endured. Century after century, snow gathered upon its towers. Lord Commanders came and went. Kingdoms rose and fell far to the south. Yet within the crumbling stones of the Night Fort remained whispers of an uncomfortable possibility. The wall had not simply been built to keep enemies out. At least once in its history, the greatest threat had emerged from within the very institution sworn to guard it. Why would a weapon capable of destroying the wall exist if the wall was meant to be humanity's greatest defense? The contradiction sits at the heart of one of the oldest mysteries in Northern history. For thousands of years, stories circulated among the free folk about a legendary artifact known as the Horn of Winter, sometimes called the Horn of Joramun. According to the tale, Joramun, the famous king beyond the wall, discovered the horn and used it to wake giants from the earth. More importantly, the legends insist that a blast from this horn could bring down the wall itself. The claim sounds absurd at first. Why would anyone create such a thing? Yet the story survived for millennia among people who preserved remarkably old traditions. That persistence alone makes the mystery difficult to dismiss. Joramun himself occupies an unusual place in northern memory. Unlike the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms, whose histories were eventually written down by maesters and septons, the kings beyond the wall exist largely within oral tradition. Joramun stands among the greatest of them. He appears in the story of the Night's King. He appears in the tale of the Horn of Winter. He appears again whenever ancient northern alliances are discussed. Even after thousands of years, his name remained familiar enough that Mance Rayder could invoke it while rallying the free folk shortly before the War of the Five Kings. The relationship between Joramun and Brandon the Breaker is particularly revealing. According to legend, these two leaders united to overthrow the Night's King after 13 years of his rule from the Night Fort. A king beyond the wall and a stark king fighting side by side would have been an extraordinary event. Such cooperation suggests that both men viewed the threat as larger than politics, territory, or cultural differences. Whatever had emerged within the Night Fort endangered everyone. The Alliance hints that the earliest purpose of the Wall may have involved protecting all humanity, not simply the kingdoms south of it. The free folk themselves preserve important clues about the Wall's forgotten history. Southerners often call them wildlings and dismiss them as raiders or barbarians. Yet the novels repeatedly challenge that assumption. Jon Snow discovers a society composed of dozens of clans, villages, and traditions. The Thenns maintain an organized culture centered in the Valley of Thenn. The Ice River clans survive in harsh territories farther north. The cave dwellers inhabit hidden underground settlements. These groups retain stories that were lost south of the Wall long ago. Why do the free folk remember things that the rest of Westeros forgot? Part of the answer lies in geography. The kingdoms of the south changed repeatedly across the centuries. The Andals invaded with steel weapons and the faith of the Seven. New dynasties rose, castles were built and destroyed, entire cultures disappeared. Beyond the Wall, however, isolation preserved ancient traditions. The free folk continued speaking dialects descended from the first men. They maintained customs older than many southern houses. Their stories remained tied to places and events that predated recorded history. This becomes especially significant when examining tales of giants. South of the Wall, giants gradually passed into folklore. Children heard stories about them around winter hearths. Maesters debated whether they had ever truly existed. Yet north of the Wall, giants remained real. Jon Snow encounters Woon Woon. He meets Magmar Tundoweg, known as Mag the Mighty, lord of a giant clan. The free folk trade with giants, fight alongside them, and share the wilderness with them. What southern scholars dismissed as myth continued walking the frozen forests in flesh and blood. The existence of giants forces a reevaluation of the Wall's construction. Ancient traditions claim giants helped raise the Wall under Brandon the Builder's direction. Modern readers often treat such accounts as exaggerations, yet the novels establish beyond doubt that giants were real and numerous in earlier ages. If thousands of giants existed during the Age of Heroes, their involvement suddenly becomes plausible. Massive blocks of ice and stone that seemed impossible for ordinary men to move become easier to imagine. The legends no longer sound like fantasy. They begin to resemble distorted memories of actual events. Another mystery emerges when one considers the geography of the far north. Maps of Westeros show that the wall does not mark the edge of civilization. Vast territories extend beyond it. The haunted forest stretches northward for hundreds of miles. The frost fangs rise in jagged peaks. Rivers flow through remote valleys. The milk water cuts through wild landscapes before reaching the sea. Human communities survived throughout these regions for centuries. The wall did not separate inhabited land from uninhabitable wilderness. It separated two worlds that remained connected despite the barrier between them. Why build the wall where it stands instead of farther north? The question rarely receives enough attention. If the purpose was purely territorial defense, builders could have attempted to claim more land. Yet the wall sits precisely where it does, for reasons nobody fully understands. The Night Fort and other castles guard a specific line. Ancient builders chose that location deliberately. Some readers have proposed that magical considerations influenced the decision. Certain places in Martin's world possess unusual significance. The Isle of Faces, the Cave of the Green Seers, and the wall itself all seem linked to deeper forces moving beneath history. The mystery deepens further when examining the gift. Long before Aegon's conquest, the Stark kings granted a large tract of land south of the wall to support the Night's Watch. This territory became known as the Gift. Farmers living there supplied food, livestock, and taxes to sustain the Watch's operations. The arrangement reveals how seriously the North regarded the institution. Supporting the wall was not an occasional concern. It shaped settlement patterns across an entire region. Generations of Stark rulers devoted land and resources to ensuring that the Watch remained strong. For much of its history, that system succeeded. Castles remained manned. Rangers patrolled the wilderness. Roads connected settlements throughout the Gift. The wall functioned as the northern frontier of civilization. Yet the arrangement also reveals something else. The Kings of Winter invested enormous resources in maintaining a defense against a threat that had not visibly appeared for thousands of years. Such persistence is unusual. Human societies rarely sustain costly institutions without reason. Either the Stark kings remembered something important, or the evidence of danger remained visible in ways later generations failed to understand. The Horn of Winter enters this discussion once again during the lifetime of Mance Rayder. Before leading the largest gathering of free folk in recorded history, Mance searched extensively for the legendary horn. He believed it might still exist somewhere in the far north. Jon Snow hears repeated references to this quest. The possibility alarms the Night's Watch because even the rumor of such a weapon threatens everything they protect. Whether Mance actually found the true horn remains uncertain. The object later discovered by Jon appears too small and ordinary to match the ancient legends. Yet the search itself matters more than the result. Mance was not a fool chasing fairy tales. He'd spent years ranging beyond the wall. He understood northern traditions better than almost anyone alive. His willingness to pursue the horn suggests that old stories retained power even among practical leaders. In the North, legends often conceal fragments of truth. The others themselves were dismissed as nursery tales until they returned. Giants survived while meisters argued about their extinction. Again and again, reality proved older and stranger than educated men expected. Why does the wall seem surrounded by forgotten safeguards, hidden doors, ancient vows, magical barriers, and stories about its destruction? Perhaps because its builders understood something later, generations gradually lost. The wall was never merely a frozen fortification. It was part of a larger system. The Night's Watch, the Gift, the Black Gate, the legends of Joramun, and the ancient alliances between Starks and free folk all point toward a deeper purpose. Somewhere beneath the myths lies a design so old that even its guardians eventually forgot pieces of it. The wall endured. The castles endured. The vows endured. But the original reasons behind them slowly faded into the snow of centuries, waiting for history to circle back once more. Why would the rulers of the North continue pouring wealth, land, and manpower into the wall long after the others had vanished from sight? The question leads directly to House Stark and the ancient kings who ruled from Winterfell. Long before Torrhen Stark knelt before Aegon the Conqueror in 1 AC, generations of Stark kings governed the North as independent monarchs. They called themselves Kings of Winter. Their authority stretched from the wall to the neck. Through wars, famines, harsh winters, and shifting alliances, one responsibility remained constant. They supported the Night's Watch. More than any other dynasty in Westeros, the Starks treated the wall not as a distant frontier, but as a sacred obligation inherited from the earliest days of their house. Winterfell itself reflects that connection. According to tradition, Brandon the Builder founded both Winterfell and the Wall. Whether one man truly accomplished both feats remains uncertain, yet the symbolic link is undeniable. The seat of House Stark rose only a few days' ride south of the Wall. The great kings of the North ruled closer to the ancient frontier than any other major royal house in Westeros. Their identity became intertwined with the defense of the realm. Even in the era of Eddard Stark, thousands of years later, that sense of duty remained visible. The Stark words, "Winter is coming," are often misunderstood by Southern lords. Many treat the phrase as a warning about seasonal hardship, yet its deeper meaning seems older than weather alone. The words sound like a remembrance, a warning passed from generation to generation. The Starks do not boast of victory, wealth, or glory. They remind themselves that danger returns. Given their unique relationship with the Wall and the Long Night, the motto acquires a different weight. It feels less like a slogan and more like institutional memory, right? Why did the North remember while the rest of Westeros forgot? Geography offers part of the answer. Northern winters are harsher. The old gods remained dominant throughout much of the region. Ancient traditions survived more easily among houses such as Stark, Reed, Umber, Karstark, and Mormont. The arrival of the Andals transformed southern Westeros, bringing the faith of the Seven, new customs, and new political structures. The North resisted those changes. While southern kingdoms evolved repeatedly, the North preserved older ways. As a result, memories connected to the Wall endured longer there than anywhere else. One house in particular embodies that preservation. House Reed of Greywater Watch. The Crannog men of the Neck remained closely tied to ancient First Men traditions. They maintained alliances with House Stark stretching back thousands of years. Mira and Jojen Reed later become essential guides during Bran Stark's journey toward the far north. Their father, Howland Reed, is one of the most mysterious figures in the modern story. Significantly, the Crannogmen preserved traditions concerning the children of the forest, long after most of Westeros dismisses them as extinct legends. The children themselves never entirely vanished from northern memory. Southern maesters increasingly treated them as creatures of folklore. Songs remembered them, stories remembered them. Direct knowledge faded, yet among northern families, traces remained. The old gods continued to be worshipped before heart trees. Weirwoods remained sacred. The connection between the children and the wall survived in legend. This persistence becomes important because the wall's magical properties increasingly point back toward the children and their forgotten arts. The evidence appears throughout the novels. The Black Gate beneath the Night Fort is clearly tied to Weirwood magic. The cave where Bran later meets the last Greenseer is protected by enchantments that prevent the dead from entering. The children demonstrate abilities involving green sight, skin changing, and the manipulation of ancient magical forces. None of these powers resemble the practices of Valyria, Ashai, or the warlocks of Korth. They belong to an older tradition rooted in Westeros itself. If the wall contains powerful enchantments, the children remain among the most plausible creators. Why then did support for the wall continue even after the Targaryens united the Seven Kingdoms? The answer can be found in the reign of one remarkable queen. In 58 AC, during the rule of King Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, Queen Alysanne journeyed north. Riding her dragon Silverwing, she visited the wall and spent time at Castle Black. There she met Lord Commander Alaric Stark, a member of the same family that ruled Winterfell. Alysanne was intelligent, politically skilled, and deeply interested in the welfare of the realm. Her visit would become one of the most significant royal encounters in the history of the Night's Watch. The Queen quickly recognized a serious problem. The gift no longer produced sufficient resources to sustain the Watch at its former strength. Populations had declined, farms stood abandoned, income had fallen. To address the issue, Alysanne persuaded Alaric Stark to transfer additional territory to the Night's Watch. This land became known as the New Gift. Vast stretches of northern countryside were dedicated to supporting the wall. The decision represented a substantial sacrifice by the North. Yet both the Starks and the Queen believed it necessary. The creation of the New Gift reveals much about how the wall was perceived during the Targaryen era. This was not a forgotten relic maintained out of habit. It remained an institution worthy of royal attention and significant economic investment. Jaehaerys and Alysanne ruled during one of the most peaceful and prosperous periods in Westerosi history. They could have ignored the Watch entirely. Instead, they strengthened it. The decision suggests that even centuries after Aegon's conquest, thoughtful leaders still regarded the wall as essential. One detail from Alysanne's visit has fascinated readers for decades. When the Queen attempted to fly Silverwing beyond the wall, the dragon refused. According to Fire and Blood, Silverwing flew repeatedly along the wall, but would not cross it. Alysanne tried multiple times. The dragon became restless and unwilling. Eventually, the queen abandoned the effort. This incident stands alone in the historical record. Dragons crossed seas, mountains, deserts, and battlefields without hesitation. Silverwing herself had flown throughout much of Westeros, yet the wall presented an obstacle she would not pass. Why? No definitive answer exists. Fire and Blood records the event but offers no explanation. Many readers believe the wall's ancient enchantments affected the dragon. Others suggest Silverwing sensed something beyond the wall that disturbed her. Still others argue that dragons possess instincts connected to magic that humans cannot fully understand. Whatever the reason, the account provides one more indication that the wall is more than frozen water and stone. Even creatures as powerful as dragons reacted differently in its presence. The contrast becomes even more striking when compared to the Targaryen worldview. The dragon lords of Valyria built their civilization upon mastery of fire and blood. Dragons represented the greatest military force in the known world. Aegon conquered 6 kingdoms with Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes. Later, Targaryens viewed dragons as symbols of near unmatched power. Yet at the wall, that confidence encounters something older, something that predates Valyria itself. The barrier stood before the freehold rose to greatness and remained standing after the doom destroyed it. As centuries passed, the lesson was gradually forgotten. The wall remained, the castles remained, the vows remained, but fewer people remembered why these things mattered. Southern lords became preoccupied with succession disputes, tournaments, marriages, and rivalries. The others faded into legend. The long night became a story told beside winter fires. Yet every so often, figures like Alysanne encountered the wall and sensed what earlier generations had understood. Beneath the ice, beneath the legends, beneath the accumulated weight of 8,000 years, something ancient still watched from the darkness beyond. Why did the wall remain standing while the institution, built to defend it, slowly withered away? By the final centuries before the events of A Game of Thrones, the contrast had become impossible to ignore. The wall still stretched from sea to sea, immense and imposing as ever. Its frozen face still caught the sunlight and reflected it across the northern landscape. Yet the Night's Watch that guarded it had diminished dramatically. Castles stood abandoned, garrisons shrank, supplies became scarce, the physical structure endured, while the human system supporting it steadily weakened. It was as though the wall itself remembered its purpose better than the people sworn to defend it. The decline unfolded gradually across generations. No single disaster caused it. Instead, changing political priorities slowly drained the watch of manpower and resources. The great wars that once unified Westeros against external threats faded into memory. Lords became more concerned with rival houses than dangers beyond the wall. Criminals increasingly filled the ranks of the Watch. Noble volunteers became rare. By the reign of Robert I Baratheon, fewer than 1,000 men remained to guard 300 miles of frontier. The numbers reveal the scale of the problem. 19 castles once operated along the wall. By 298 AC, only 3 remained active. Castle Black served as headquarters. Eastwatch by the Sea guarded the eastern end, overlooking the Bay of Seals and the Shivering Sea. The shadow tower watched the western mountains near the gorge. The remaining 16 castles stood empty. Some had partially collapsed. Others were buried beneath centuries of snow and neglect. Entire stretches of the wall existed with no permanent defenders at all. Why did the rulers of Westeros allow this to happen? Part of the answer lies in success. The wall had functioned so effectively for so long that its purpose became invisible. The others had not been seen for thousands of years. Wildling raids still occurred, but they seemed manageable. The long night belonged to legend rather than lived experience. Human beings are poor at maintaining vigilance against threats that never arrive. Every generation inherited the wall and assumed it would continue protecting them. Few stop to ask whether protection requires guardians. This complacency appears repeatedly throughout the novels. Tyrion Lannister visits Castle Black and quickly recognizes the Watch's desperate condition. Benjen Stark openly worries about missing rangers and growing dangers beyond the wall. Jeor Mormont writes letters requesting assistance, yet their concerns attract little attention in King's Landing. The capital focuses on court politics, succession issues, and factional struggles. The wall occupies the edge of the map and the edge of people's thoughts. Distance encourages neglect. Jeor Mormont understood the danger better than most. Known as the Old Bear, Mormont served as Lord Commander during a period when strange reports began multiplying. Rangers vanished. Villages beyond the wall appeared abandoned. Unusual sightings spread through the wilderness. Unlike many southern lords, Mormont did not dismiss such warnings automatically. Years of service had taught him respect for the North's old stories. When experienced rangers reported unsettling developments, he listened. His caution would soon prove justified. The first major sign appears in the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones. Sir Waymar Royce, a young knight from House Royce of the Vale, leads a ranging beyond the wall alongside Will and Garrett. Deep within the haunted forest, they discover a mysterious scene. Wildlings lie dead without visible wounds. The forest remains unnaturally silent. Then the others appear. Martin begins the entire saga with this encounter for a reason. The threat that originally justified the wall's existence has returned. The scene is worth lingering upon because it changes everything that follows. Waymar Royce is not facing bandits, raiders, or ordinary enemies. He confronts a being out of legend. The other carries a crystal sword. Its armor shifts and shimmers strangely in the moonlight. The duel ends with Royce's death, and later his corpse rises as a wight. The ancient stories prove true. The enemy that inspired the construction of the wall was never entirely gone. Why did so few people believe the reports? Because disbelief had become institutionalized. For centuries, Meisters treated the others as mythical. Lords regarded them as nursery tales. Even educated members of the Night's Watch often doubted their existence. The organization had survived so long without encountering its original enemy that memory transformed into skepticism. Evidence contradicted assumptions, yet assumptions remained powerful. Martin repeatedly explores this pattern throughout the novels. The greatest dangers often emerge while people are looking elsewhere. The return of the Whites confirms that something fundamental has changed. Other and Jafer flowers, dead rangers recovered by the Watch, rise within Castle Black itself. The attack nearly kills Lord Commander Mormont. Jon Snow saves him by setting the creatures ablaze. The incident demonstrates several critical facts. The dead can be reanimated. Fire remains effective against them. Most importantly, the threat has penetrated south of the wall, despite all the defenses supposedly protecting the realm. Mormont responds with one of the most ambitious operations in the Watch's recent history. He organizes the Great Ranging. Hundreds of Black Brothers ride north to investigate conditions beyond the wall. Their destination includes Craster's Keep, the Fist of the First Men, and territories deep within the haunted forest. The mission reflects Mormont's growing alarm. Passive observation is no longer sufficient. The Watch must discover what is happening before it is overwhelmed. The Fist of the First Men provides another fascinating connection to ancient history. This ring fort sits atop a hill in the northern wilderness. According to tradition, it dates back to the Age of Heroes. The First Men supposedly used it long before the wall existed. Its very name preserves memory of Westeros's earliest human inhabitants. Once again, the struggle against the others leads directly back toward the oldest layers of history. The deeper the Night's Watch investigates, the closer it moves toward the origins of the wall itself. Why do ancient sites keep appearing whenever the others return? The answer may lie in the cyclical nature of history within Martin's world. The wall was built after the Long Night. The Night's Watch emerged after the Long Night. Many northern legends originate from the same era. When the others begin moving again, those old places regain importance. The Fist of the First Men, the Night Fort, the lands beyond the wall, and the hidden roots known only to ancient peoples all become relevant once more. It is as though the world is retracing forgotten pathways. Meanwhile, far beyond the wall, another figure begins gathering strength. Mance Rayder, once a brother of the Night's Watch, unites the free folk into the largest host seen north of the wall in centuries. Clan chiefs, raiders, thens, giants, mammoth riders, and countless families rally beneath his leadership. Southern observers interpret this movement as an invasion. Mance himself insists otherwise. According to him, the free folk are not marching south to conquer. They are fleeing. Fleeing from what? That question hangs over the frozen wilderness as the Great Ranging pushes deeper into the north. Mance Rayder knows something. The giants know something. Craster, isolated in his strange keep, knows something. Even the forests seem to know. The wall still stands, as high and cold as ever. But for the first time in thousands of years, the danger it was built to confront is moving once again through the darkness. And this time the men guarding the wall are weaker than they have ever been. Why were certain men at the wall already preparing for the return of ancient dangers, while the rest of Westeros remained asleep? To answer that question, we must turn to two remarkable figures whose lives became deeply intertwined with the wall: Maester Aemon Targaryen and Brynden Rivers, better known to history as Blood Raven. Both men belonged to House Targaryen. Both abandoned positions of immense influence. Both eventually journeyed north, and both in different ways seem connected to the hidden knowledge buried beneath thousands of years of history. Their stories suggest that some individuals understood the wall far more deeply than they ever openly admitted. Maester Aemon arrived at Castle Black long before the main events of the novels. Born a prince of House Targaryen, he was the younger brother of King Aegon V, remembered as Aegon the Unlikely. When succession crises emerged after the Great Council of 233 AC, Aemon refused the crown and remained loyal to his vows as a maester. To avoid becoming a focal point for political conflict, he chose service at the Wall. Decades passed, kings rose and fell, dynasties changed, yet Aemon remained, quietly observing from the northern frontier. By the time Jon Snow meets him, Aemon is old, blind, and physically frail, yet his mind remains extraordinarily sharp. More importantly, he treats old legends with a seriousness uncommon among Southern scholars. He does not laugh at stories of prophecy. He does not automatically dismiss ancient warnings. Throughout the novels, Aemon consistently demonstrates an awareness that the world contains forces beyond conventional politics. His long years at the Wall appear to have reinforced that understanding rather than diminished it. Why does Aemon speak so often about forgotten prophecies? The answer partly involves his Targaryen background. House Targaryen maintained a long tradition of prophetic dreams and visions. Dennis the Dreamer foresaw the doom of Valyria. Other members of the family experienced prophetic experiences of varying reliability. Aemon spent years studying such traditions. When reports of dragons returning and strange events in the east begin reaching Castle Black, he pays close attention. Unlike many maesters, he understands that old prophecies sometimes emerge from genuine historical memory. His conversations about the prince that was promised become increasingly significant as the story progresses. Aemon studies reports concerning Daenerys Targaryen, her dragons, and ancient prophecies linked to Azor Ahai. He becomes convinced that events of global importance are unfolding. The Wall, in his view, is not isolated from these developments. Instead, it stands at the center of them. Ancient warnings about darkness returning appear to connect the far north and distant Essos in ways nobody fully understands. Yet even Aemon's remarkable life is overshadowed by the mystery of Bloodraven. Brynden Rivers was born a great bastard of King Aegon IV Targaryen. His mother belonged to House Blackwood, one of the oldest first men houses in Westeros. Brynden possessed pale skin, white hair, and a distinctive red birthmark, resembling a raven across his face. During the reigns of Daeron II and Aerys I, he served as Master of Whisperers and later Hand of the King. His intelligence network became legendary. Few men in Westerosi history wielded more information or more influence. Bloodraven's career was marked by controversy. He played a central role during the Blackfyre rebellions. He ordered the death of Demon Blackfyre's sons during a parley. His enemies accused him of sorcery and manipulation. His supporters viewed him as a ruthless defender of stability. Whatever judgment one makes, his impact upon the realm was enormous. Eventually, however, political fortunes shifted. King Aegon V sentenced him to the Wall for executing Innis Blackfyre under safe conduct. Why would a man like Bloodraven end his life at the Wall? At first glance, the answer seems simple. He was exiled there as punishment. Yet the deeper story becomes increasingly strange. Bloodraven did not merely serve at the Wall, he eventually became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Then, in 252 AC, during a ranging beyond the Wall, he vanished. His disappearance entered the records as one more unsolved mystery of the northern wilderness. Decades later, readers discover that his story did not end there. Deep beyond the wall, Bran Stark encounters an ancient green seer living within a vast cave protected by powerful magic. The figure appears physically fused to the roots of a weirwood tree. His body is ancient. His remaining eye watches from a face that has become almost skeletal. The clues gradually reveal his identity. This green seer is Brynden Rivers. Bloodraven survived his disappearance and became something entirely different from the political operator he once was. The significance of this transformation is difficult to overstate. Bloodraven gains access to the Weirwood network, connecting countless trees across Westeros. Through Greensight, he observes events separated by vast distances and centuries. He studies history itself. The children of the forest assist him. Ancient magic surrounds him. In effect, one of Westeros's most knowledgeable political minds spends decades investigating mysteries connected to the same forces that helped create the Wall. Why do Bloodraven, Bran Stark, the children of the forest, and the Wall all converge within the same narrative? Because Martin repeatedly links the Wall to the deepest magical foundations of his world. The Wall is not simply a military structure. It sits at the intersection of several ancient traditions. First Men history leads there. The children of the forest lead there. Green seers lead there. The others lead there. Again and again, the story's oldest mysteries point north. The Wall functions as a boundary, but also as a meeting point between different eras of history. The cave where Bran trains offers several revealing parallels to the Wall itself. Magical wards prevent the dead from entering. Ancient weirwoods surround the location. The children actively maintain its protections. Similar patterns appear at the Wall. Magical barriers repel certain supernatural forces. Weirwood magic appears through the Black Gate. Legends repeatedly associate the structure with the children. The similarities suggest a shared origin, or at least a shared magical tradition. Meanwhile, events north of the Wall continue accelerating. During the Great Ranging, Jeor Mormont leads hundreds of brothers to the Fist of the First Men. There they establish defensive positions atop the ancient ring fort. The location offers strategic advantages. Elevated ground provides visibility. Defensive earthworks strengthen protection. Yet despite these precautions, disaster approaches. The Night's Watch is about to encounter the returning enemy in force. The attack on the Fist of the First Men demonstrates how dangerous the others have become. Waves of whites emerge from the darkness. Dead men and women swarm the defenses. Chaos spreads through the camp. Horses panic. Fires burn. Horn blasts echo across the night. The Night's Watch suffers devastating losses. Survivors scatter through the wilderness. For the first time in recorded history, the ancient enemy has openly struck a major force south of the lands of Always Winter. Why choose this moment to return after thousands of years? The novels have not yet provided a definitive answer. Some readers point towards cyclical patterns tied to the seasons. Others focus on prophecy. Still others believe the others are responding to events involving magic elsewhere in the world, including the rebirth of dragons. What matters for our story is that the Wall's original purpose suddenly becomes relevant again. The warnings preserved by Brandon the Builder, the Night's Watch, the Starks, and countless forgotten generations no longer feel remote. They feel immediate. Far to the south, lords continue fighting over crowns. The War of the Five Kings consumes attention and resources. Robb Stark marches through the Riverlands. Stannis Baratheon challenges the Iron Throne. House Lannister struggles to maintain control, yet beyond the wall, older powers are moving. Powers that care nothing for thrones, banners, or dynasties. The ancient barrier still stands between them and the realms of men, but the long sleep of history is ending, and the wall is once again becoming what it was always meant to be. Was the wall built to keep the others out, or was it built to keep something else contained in the far north? By the middle of a storm of swords, that question begins to feel less theoretical and more urgent. The Night's Watch has suffered disaster at the fist of the First Men. Survivors flee south through snow-choked forests while the dead pursue them. Mance Rayder's vast host continues moving toward the wall. Reports of others and whites multiply. Ancient fears are becoming visible realities, yet even as the threat returns, the true purpose of the wall remains frustratingly unclear. One reason the mystery persists is that the wall separates more than territories. It separates narratives. South of the wall, most people believe it was built to stop invasions from the north. Beyond the wall, many free folk view it as a prison wall imposed upon lands that once belonged to their ancestors. Neither explanation fully accounts for its magical properties. Neither explains the Black Gate. Neither explains Silverwing's refusal to cross. The wall appears designed for purposes far more complex than simple border defense. The possibility becomes harder to ignore when Jon Snow spends time among the free folk. After escaping the Fist, Jon infiltrates Mance Rayder's forces under orders from Qhorin Halfhand. During this period, he learns things that many brothers of the Watch never understood. The free folk are not united by dreams of conquest. Most are fleeing south because they fear what is happening in the far north. Villages disappear, the dead walk. Ancient terrors stir. Mance is gathering people because remaining scattered means extinction. Why does Mance Rayder fear the far north more than the wall itself? Because he has seen evidence that the others are becoming active on a scale not witnessed for thousands of years. Mance spent years ranging through remote territories. He spoke with clans from the Frostfangs. He gathered reports from settlements deep within the haunted forest. Piece by piece, he concluded that survival required uniting the free folk. His goal was not glory, his goal was escape. The wall stood between his people and safety. This creates an unusual inversion of the wall's traditional role. For thousands of years, the barrier was viewed as protecting the South from dangers beyond it. Now, enormous numbers of people are trying desperately to cross southward because danger is pursuing them from the north. The wall remains exactly where it has always been, yet the direction of fear has changed. The structure that once blocked threats is now obstructing refugees. Jon's experiences among the free folk reveal another important truth. Human life continues far beyond the wall. He meets Tormund Giantsbane, Ygritte, Rattleshirt, Varamir Sixskins, the Magnar of Thenn, and countless ordinary families. Children play in camps, hunters gather food, elders tell stories beside fires. These are not creatures of darkness. They are human beings navigating impossible circumstances. The wall does not separate humanity from monsters. It separates different branches of humanity from one another. Why would the original builders create a barrier that divided people who ultimately share the same ancient ancestry? The question returns us once more to the long night. If the wall emerged after humanity's greatest catastrophe, its purpose may have been linked less to territory and more to containment. Several fan theories explore this possibility. Some suggest the wall was constructed to isolate lands corrupted during the war against the others. Others propose that ancient magical agreements required specific boundaries. The books provide no definitive answer, but they repeatedly encourage readers to think beyond conventional military explanations. One fascinating clue comes from the geography north of the wall. Beyond the haunted forest lie regions even older and stranger. The frost fangs dominate the western horizon. The milk water flows through rugged valleys. Farther north stand locations such as the Valley of the Thens and Hardhome on the coast. Beyond those regions lie territories scarcely explored by any living character. At the edge of maps rests the most mysterious location of all, the lands of Always Winter. The lands of Always Winter occupy a unique place in northern lore. Every account associates them with the others. Ancient traditions describe them as the source of the long night. The children of the forest reference them. Old Nan references them. The Night's Watch speaks of them with unease. Unlike many legendary places in Westeros, these lands are not presented as myths. They are real locations, remote and terrifyingly unexplored. Somewhere within that frozen expanse, the others endure. The existence of the lands of Always Winter raises another intriguing possibility. What if the wall was not placed where it was merely to defend the north? What if it was positioned along a boundary considered magically significant? Martin often associates magical power with geography. The Isle of Faces occupies a unique location within the God's Eye. The wall itself stretches across a carefully chosen line. The Cave of the Greenseers sits hidden within a protected region. Certain places matter in ways that transcend ordinary strategy. Why does magic seem concentrated around the wall? One answer emerges through Bran Stark's journey. As Bran travels north with Mira Reed, Jojen Reed, Hodor, Cold Hands, and Summer, he repeatedly encounters traces of ancient magical networks. Weirwoods serve as conduits for green sight. Dreams carry messages across great distances. Skin changers connect human minds to animals. These abilities are not new. They existed long before the Targaryens arrived in Westeros. They belong to a much older layer of the world. The wall appears deeply connected to that layer. The children of the forest reinforce this connection. When Bran finally reaches the cave beyond the wall, he encounters some of the last surviving children. They speak of ancient struggles. They preserve old knowledge. Their existence confirms that many supposedly extinct traditions endured in secret. Most importantly, they demonstrate that the magical world of the Age of Heroes never entirely disappeared. It simply retreated from public view. The wall stands directly at the boundary between those hidden realities and the ordinary human world. Meanwhile, events at the wall itself continue accelerating. Mance Raider's forces eventually reach the barrier. Climbers scale its icy face. Raiders attack from the south after passing through hidden routes. The Night's Watch faces threats from multiple directions simultaneously. Under the leadership of Jon Snow and Donal Noy, Castle Black mounts a desperate defense. The fighting demonstrates both the strength and vulnerability of the wall. The ice remains formidable, but numbers matter. A dwindling watch cannot guard every passage forever. During these battles, another revealing fact emerges. The greatest immediate danger is not the others. It is human conflict. The Night's Watch and the Free Folk, both threatened by the same supernatural enemy, find themselves fighting one another. Martin returns repeatedly to this pattern. Ancient dangers approach, while human beings remain divided by culture, politics, and old grievances. The wall becomes a symbol of that division as much as a defense against external threats. And yet beneath the clash of arrows, beneath the blowing horns and falling ice, a larger mystery continues to grow. The others remain active in the wilderness beyond sight. The children preserve ancient secrets. Bloodraven watches through the Weir Woods. The lands of always winter remain unexplored. Every path leads back toward the same unsettling possibility. The wall may have been built not simply as a shield against invasion, but as part of a far older arrangement whose original terms have almost entirely been forgotten. Who really built the wall? A legendary king? An alliance of forgotten peoples? Or something even more complicated than either story admits? After traveling through thousands of years of history, the question returns to the beginning. Brandon the Builder remains the traditional answer. Every northern child hears his name. House Stark traces its lineage to him. The Wall, Winterfell, and often Storm's End are attributed to his genius. Yet the closer one examines the evidence, the harder it becomes to accept a simple explanation. The wall is too large, too strange, and too deeply infused with magic to fit comfortably within the accomplishments of a single historical figure. Consider first the practical challenge. The wall extends roughly 300 miles from the gorge in the west to the Bay of Seals in the east. At its greatest points, it rises approximately 700 feet high. Even with modern engineering, such a project would be extraordinary. In the aftermath of the Long Night, when populations had been devastated and entire regions were struggling to survive, the challenge becomes almost unimaginable. The scale alone suggests cooperation between multiple groups over an extended period. This is precisely what the oldest legends describe. Northern traditions consistently credit three participants. Brandon the Builder provided leadership. Giants supplied immense physical labor. The children of the forest contributed ancient magic. Taken separately, each claim raises questions. Taken together, they form a surprisingly coherent picture. The giants solve the problem of moving enormous quantities of material. The children explain the wall's magical properties. Brandon and the First Men provide organization, manpower, and political authority. Why do these particular elements fit together so neatly? Because each group possessed capabilities the others lacked. The First Men could establish kingdoms, gather resources, and coordinate large-scale construction. Giants possessed extraordinary strength. The children commanded magical arts tied to weirwoods, greensight, and ancient enchantments. None could easily accomplish the task alone. Together, however, they form a plausible coalition emerging from the shared trauma of the Long Night. A civilization-threatening disaster often creates alliances that would otherwise seem impossible. Interestingly, Martin repeatedly presents similar partnerships elsewhere in his world. During the original pact, the first men and the children ended generations of warfare to confront a larger reality. During the legend of the Night's King, Brandon the Breaker and Joramun united despite being traditional enemies. During the main story, Jon Snow attempts to unite the Night's Watch and the Free Folk against the others. The pattern recurs across thousands of years. Survival often requires cooperation between groups that normally stand apart. The magical evidence may be even more persuasive than the practical evidence. The wall does things ordinary ice should not do. The Black Gate beneath the Night Fort remains active after thousands of years. Cold hands cannot pass certain magical boundaries. Silverwing refuses to cross the wall. The others never simply move through it despite their apparent power. These details suggest enchantments woven directly into the structure. Such magic resembles the abilities associated with the children far more than anything known to later civilizations. The comparison becomes clearer when examining other magical sites. The Cave of the Greenseers is protected by wards against the dead. Weirwoods preserve memories across centuries. Greenseers observe distant places through ancient roots. The wall exhibits similar themes. Boundaries matter, memory matters, protection against supernatural forces matters. The same underlying magical tradition appears again and again. It is difficult to imagine the children playing no role in the wall's creation when their influence is visible in so many connected mysteries. Why then does Brandon the Builder remain the central figure? Partly because human cultures naturally remember leaders more easily than coalitions. Names survive. Institutions preserve founders. Stories focus on individuals. Thousands of workers may construct a castle, but history usually remembers the lord who commissioned it. Brandon became the face of a much larger achievement. Whether he personally designed the wall, supervised portions of its construction, or simply became associated with the project over centuries, his memory endured while others faded. There is another possibility as well. Some readers have suggested that Brandon the Builder may represent more than one person. The timeline of the Age of Heroes is notoriously uncertain. Events blur together. Different legends overlap. Multiple historical figures named Brandon could have existed across centuries. Over time, their accomplishments may have merged into a single legendary ancestor. This remains speculation, but it reflects a common process in real-world mythology and fits the fragmentary nature of ancient Westerosi history. The mystery of Storm's End strengthens this argument. According to tradition, Brandon the Builder also assisted in constructing that immense fortress on the eastern coast of the Stormlands. Storm's End possesses unusual characteristics of its own. Massive curtain walls resist storms that should destroy them. Ancient legends associate the castle with magical protection. The similarities to the wall are intriguing. Both structures seem larger and stranger than ordinary engineering can easily explain. Why do Brandon's greatest achievements all appear connected to unusual forms of protection? Perhaps because later generations remembered him as a guardian rather than merely a builder. Winterfell, the Wall, and Storm's End all function as defensive strongholds. Each stands against a different threat. Winterfell protects the north. Storm's End faces the fury of Shipbreaker Bay. The Wall guards the realms of men. Whether or not one historical figure created all three, the stories associate Brandon with preservation, endurance, and survival. He becomes a symbolic response to catastrophe. Yet even if we accept the alliance theory, another question remains unresolved. Why was the wall built in the first place? The traditional answer is straightforward. The others had been defeated but not destroyed. The wall prevented their return. There is strong evidence supporting this interpretation. The timing fits. The magical protections fit. The creation of the Night's Watch fits. For thousands of years, this explanation served as the accepted history of the North. Even now it remains the simplest and most widely accepted understanding of the wall's purpose. But several details refuse to sit comfortably within that explanation. If the others were trapped beyond the wall, why do legends preserve stories about the Horn of Winter bringing the barrier down? Why create magical gates allowing passage through it? Why maintain communication with lands beyond it? Why does the Night's King story suggest supernatural dangers emerging from within the wall's own defenses? Each mystery hints that the wall's original function may have been more nuanced than simple exclusion. Boundaries can separate enemies, but they can also regulate relationships. Some fan theories propose that the wall marked the terms of an ancient peace. According to these ideas, the others and humanity reached an agreement after the Long Night. The wall became both border and reminder. It established limits neither side would cross. The books have never confirmed such a theory, yet certain details keep it alive. The emphasis on magical boundaries, ancient pacts, and forgotten agreements resonates strongly throughout Northern history. Martin repeatedly returns to the notion that old promises matter long after their original context has been forgotten. As the surviving books approach their unresolved conclusion, the wall remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in the entire saga. We know who is traditionally credited with building it. We know which institutions grew around it. We know many of the legends attached to it. Yet the deepest truths remain hidden. The ice still conceals secrets. The old stories still contain gaps. And somewhere beyond the wall, in lands where winter never truly ends, lie answers that even the oldest chronicles have failed to preserve. The strange thing is that after 8,000 years, the wall has already succeeded in one respect. It protected its mysteries almost as effectively as it protected the realm itself. Why does the wall still feel mysterious even after we have traced its history from the Long Night to the return of the others? The answer lies in a simple fact. The wall was never merely a structure. It was a response. Every generation inherited it, protected it, misunderstood it, reinterpreted it, and projected its own fears onto it. The first men saw survival. The Night's Watch saw duty. The free folk saw division. The Targaryens saw an ancient wonder. Modern readers see an unsolved puzzle woven through the heart of the story. The wall remains compelling because it stands at the point where history, memory, and myth become impossible to separate completely. If we gather together the strongest pieces of evidence, a broad picture begins to emerge. The Long Night devastated the world. Humanity survived only through extraordinary alliances. The others were pushed back but not erased. The wall was raised soon afterward with assistance that appears to have included the children of the forest and possibly giants. The Night's Watch was established to guard it. Ancient magical protections became part of its design. For thousands of years, these facts remained hidden beneath layers of fading memory. Yet the deeper question is not who built the wall. The deeper question is why its builders believed such extreme measures were necessary. The scale of the project reveals the scale of the fear. People do not spend generations raising a 300-mile barrier because of a temporary threat. They do not dedicate entire military orders to guarding it. They do not surrender land through the gift and later the new gift. They do not preserve sacred vows for 8,000 years. Everything about the wall suggests that those who created it expected the danger to return eventually. This expectation explains many otherwise puzzling details. The Night's Watch oath speaks as though the war never truly ended. The stark words carry the same feeling. Ancient legends consistently emphasize vigilance rather than victory. Even the story of the Night's King serves as a warning that corruption and danger can emerge from unexpected places. The wall's culture is built around preparation. Its builders appear to have understood something that later generations gradually forgot. Why did later generations forget so much? Because peace is often the enemy of memory. When a threat vanishes for centuries, practical concerns replace ancient fears. Lords focus on taxes, marriages, inheritances, and local disputes. Maesters seek rational explanations for stories inherited from distant ancestors. Children hear tales of the others and treat them as entertainment. The wall remains visible, but the reasons behind it become abstract. By the beginning of A Game of Thrones, many people regard the Long Night much the way modern societies regard prehistoric disasters. Interesting, but irrelevant. Martin repeatedly challenges that assumption throughout the novels. Again and again, old stories prove more reliable than contemporary certainty. The others return, giants survive, the children of the forest endure, green seers exist, dragons hatch once more in the east, ancient powers dismissed as myths reveal themselves to be real. One of the central themes of A Song of Ice and Fire is that history matters. Forgotten truths do not cease to exist simply because people stop believing them. This theme brings us back to the wall itself. Every major mystery surrounding the structure points toward incomplete knowledge. Brandon the Builder's true role remains uncertain. The exact nature of the wall's enchantments remains uncertain. The relationship between the others and the Long Night remains uncertain. Even the ultimate purpose of the wall remains uncertain. The books intentionally preserve these ambiguities because they reflect the limitations of history. Real civilizations often inherit monuments whose original meanings become obscured over time. Why does the theory of an ancient pact continue attracting so much attention among readers? Because it explains several otherwise disconnected clues. The children of the forest repeatedly forge agreements with former enemies. Magical boundaries appear throughout the story. The wall functions as both barrier and border. The emphasis on forgotten promises echoes across multiple plot lines. None of this proves that humanity and the others reached a formal settlement after the Long Night. Yet the possibility feels thematically consistent with Martin's world, where agreements often outlive the people who created them. Other readers prefer a simpler interpretation. The wall was built to stop the others. Nothing more is required. The magical protections exist because the enemy was magical. The Night's Watch exists because vigilance was necessary. The Horn of Winter, if real, may have been intended as a last resort during some forgotten crisis. This explanation also fits much of the evidence. One reason the wall remains such a fascinating mystery is that several interpretations remain plausible simultaneously. What we can say with confidence is that the wall changed the course of Westerosi history. Without it, the North would have developed differently. The Night's Watch would never have emerged. The Starks would have inherited a different legacy. Entire cultures beyond the wall might have evolved along different paths. The structure influenced politics, settlement patterns, religion, military organization, and mythology for thousands of years. Few constructions in fantasy literature possess such deep historical consequences. The most revealing perspective may come from Jon Snow himself. Throughout the novels, Jon gradually learns that the wall cannot solve every problem. Ice and stone are powerful, but understanding matters more. The free folk are not the true enemy. Ancient divisions weaken humanity. Survival depends upon cooperation. In many ways, Jon rediscovers lessons that seem to have been understood during the Age of Heroes. The wall remains important, but it is not sufficient by itself. And so we arrive where our journey began. The night is cold atop the wall. The wind moves across the ice with the same low murmur it carried thousands of years ago. Far below, small points of torchlight flicker around Castle Black. Beyond the wall stretch the haunted forest, the frost fangs, Hardhome, and the distant lands of always winter fading into darkness beneath the stars. Somewhere out there lie the final answers to questions that have endured since the dawn of recorded history. And standing upon the ancient ice, listening to the endless northern wind, you can almost understand why generation after generation gazed into that darkness and believed that the wall was not merely guarding the realm from mystery, but guarding the mystery itself. What makes the wall so enduring is not its height, its length, or even its magic. It is the fact that it stands at the meeting point between memory and forgetting. Throughout the history of Westeros, kingdoms rose, houses vanished, dynasties replaced one another, and countless wars were fought over crowns that eventually passed to someone else. Yet the wall remained. The men who built it disappeared into legend. The reasons for its construction faded into uncertainty. And still, the ice endured, silently preserving a warning that generations could no longer fully understand. In that sense, the wall becomes one of George R.R. Martin's most powerful ideas, the notion that history is always larger than the people living inside it. When you look closely at the story, you begin to notice that nearly every tragedy in Westeros grows from the same mistake. People become consumed by immediate concerns and lose sight of older truths. The kings of the South fight for thrones while winter approaches. Great lords argue over inheritance, while ancient enemies stir in forgotten forests. Ambition narrows their vision. The wall stands as a rebuke to that habit. It was built by people who had survived catastrophe and understood that some dangers do not disappear simply because they have been absent for a long time. Their answer was not a weapon or an army, Their answer was memory made visible. That is why the Night's Watch matters so much within the larger story. At its best, the Watch represents a rare ideal in Martin's world. Its oath strips away questions of birth, wealth, politics, and personal glory. A king's son and a poacher can stand side by side in the same black cloak. The wall does not care who your father was. Winter does not care what banner you carry. The others do not care which claimant sits upon the Iron Throne. Against truly existential threats, the divisions that seem so important in ordinary times suddenly appear fragile and temporary. The wall exists to remind humanity of that reality. The deeper mystery surrounding its construction strengthens that lesson rather than weakening it. We never receive a complete answer because the uncertainty itself carries meaning. Brandon the Builder, the children of the forest, the giants, the last hero, the Night's King, Joramun, Bloodraven, Bran Stark, each belongs to a different age, yet all are connected by the same thread. They become participants in a story far older than themselves. The wall is not the achievement of one hero. It is the accumulated work of generations responding to a challenge too large for any single person to solve. The structure becomes a monument to cooperation across centuries. There is also something quietly melancholy about the wall. Its builders succeeded so completely that later generations stopped understanding why it was necessary. The very effectiveness of the barrier helped erase the memory of the terror that created it. That pattern appears everywhere in history, both within Martin's world and beyond it. Safety breeds comfort. Comfort breeds forgetfulness. Forgetfulness invites the return of old dangers. The wall stands frozen inside that cycle, watching it repeat again and again as centuries pass beneath the turning seasons. And so when you leave this story behind, what lingers is not merely the question of who built the wall. It is the image of human beings reaching beyond themselves in the aftermath of darkness. Somewhere in the distant age of heroes, survivors looked north toward the lands of always winter and decided that memory must outlast fear. They raised a barrier of ice, filled it with vows, stories, sacrifices, and ancient magic, then entrusted it to people they would never meet. Thousands of years later, beneath a sky bright with cold stars, a lone ranger still stands upon that frozen crest. The wind moves softly across the ancient ice. Torchlight flickers far below, and beyond the wall the darkness waits as patiently as it always has.